Okay, brilliant. I think we'll kick off as we just wait for a few more people to join. But welcome everybody to this techUK event titled Making the Most of the UK's Photonics Clusters. I'm Rory and I'll be moderating this session. And I think you've joined for a really interesting discussion about just what these clusters do, how industry can best engage with them. And we've got a really fantastic panel to share lots of insights for us today. So just before we get going, I'm going to quickly run through one or two things. The first is to introduce myself, and my name is Rory, and I lead techUK's emerging technology and innovation activity, working with lots of our most innovative member companies to share examples of best practice, to convene the sector, to be the voice of industry when talking to government, and much more. My colleague Ella is also running this event, so I'll let Ella quickly introduce herself too.
Morning everyone, I'm Ella, a Junior Programme Manager in the Emerging Tech team, leading some of techUK's work on photonics.
Brilliant, thanks Ella. And we'll mention just who techUK are in a second, but before I do so, some housekeeping. This webinar is being recorded and it will be posted on techUK's Innovation Hub after the event. So please can I just ask that you remain on mute, and there'll be some time at the end for questions and answers, in which case feel free to come off mute for that and to post any questions in the chat throughout, and our speakers will either get to them kind of in real time or in the final 10-15 minutes of the discussion. And the other thing to say is, I guess, just how the agenda looks. So, and if you could please move us on. I don't think it's come through for us yet, Ella. Unless it's just me. Oh no, maybe it's just me. Brilliant. So this is how the agenda will look. We'll quickly start with some introductions from our fantastic panelists, and then essentially the panel discussion will be around 4 themes. So what is a cluster, and what sort of support do they offer? How can industry best engage with the UK's photonics clusters? We'll see some examples of best practice, and we've got quite an interesting mix of clusters, I think, on this meeting. And then how can industry and government support clusters to maximise their impact? And looking ahead, what role will clusters play in shaping the future of the UK's photonics sector? We know it'll be an important one, but just how will that look, I think, is the question. And then, as I said, an opportunity for a bit of audience Q&A as well. Brilliant. Next slide, please, Ella. So just very quickly, who are we as techUK? techUK is the UK's Technology Trade Association. We've got about 1,100 member companies, most of which are UK-based tech companies, you could call them, that develop technologies, but they are predominantly SMEs, but include virtually all the world's largest tech companies as well. We do 3 things. We develop markets, which means put government, bring tech companies and government together to help with procurement and building relationships in that kind of commercial space. Championing tech and innovation, so showcasing what our members are doing, sharing best practice, lots of speaking, writing opportunities all around how tech is being used or could be used. And then finally, shaping policy and regulation. So lots of events with and engagement with government stakeholders to shape the future of technology, digital, or innovation, policy, strategy, regulation. So that's us. Brilliant. What I'm going to do is quickly hand over to Ella, who's just going to say 1 or 2 words about photonics in the UK.
Thank you, Rory. So I'm just going to give some a bit of a headline overview about photonics in the UK and what we're doing here at techUK. So for those who don't know, photonics is the study or the science and technology of light, or the processes that generate, transmit, transform, detect, or manipulate light in any format. It has a variety of use cases, some of which you can see on the slide, but for example, it's used in headlamps, medical instruments, manufacturing, data transmission, telecoms, lasers, any kind of sensoring like environmental sensoring. And it's a huge industry here in the UK, employing over 84,000 people. That's more than in the automotive or aerospace industries. And it has recently been recognised as a technology needed for growth in the 2025 industrial strategy. This webinar forms part of techUK's Photonics Sprint campaign. This is a 5-month initiative that seeks to understand how the UK can lead in the development and deployment of photonics. So we're going to be running a series of workshops and webinars, networking events, roundtables, panel discussions that bring the sector together to understand applications, cases of best practice, opportunities and challenges that are facing the photonics sector. And we will be producing a report in 2026 that highlights the key findings from events such as this one, that kind of lists some policy recommendations to inform government and industry on the next steps that need to be acted upon to further develop photonics in the UK. If anyone has any questions about the work we're doing in Photonics Tech UK, please do drop me an email. I can put my email in the chat with any questions, or if you want to get involved with our sprint. So just to kind of highlight before we kick off with the main discussion for the webinar, this is kind of some stats of how photonics looks in the UK. There are over 1,400 photonics companies in the UK, which every year. Distributed across the UK, particular regional strengths are in Northern Ireland, the south of England, Scotland, across the central belt as well. And this kind of innovative capacity has been built around universities. There's 40 universities in the UK that are leading in photonics research. So yeah, often built around academic centres of excellence, and then kind of supporting research and companies to spin out from some of these universities. And this has kind of positioned the UK as a kind of photonics powerhouse. And yeah, these clusters play a really important role in kind of maintaining that position for the UK, and how the UK can continue to lead in photonics and kind of remain an attractive kind of pull for different talents and investment into photonics from around the world. And in this webinar, we'll be able to kind of explore this further, looking at how industry can best engage with these clusters. So pass back to you, Rory.
Thanks, Ella. That was brilliant. So what I'm going to do is quickly hand over to our speakers to very briefly say who they are, why they're interested in this topic, and which organisation and cluster they represent. So Lizzie, I'm going to start with you.
Hi there, so I'm Lizzie Patterson. I'm the Senior Policy Programme Manager on the Government Relations team at Seagate Technology. If you don't know who Seagate are, we produce hard drives, but we are a data storage provider. We design and manufacture hard drives, and we have a facility in Northern Ireland, which is a wafer fab facility. A lot of our R&D work there is centred around photonics, and we're also part of the Smart Nano cluster in Northern Ireland.
Brilliant. Thanks, Lizzie. Andy. Sorry, Andy, I think you're on mute.
Sorry about that. I put myself on mute because I was ruffling papers. Good morning, everybody. I'm Andy Sellers. I'm Director of Strategy for Cornerstone. We're a world-leading photonics foundry at the University of Southampton. We have worked with over 100 companies worldwide. We've done something like 1,000 different chip designs for companies in over 20 countries worldwide. Cutting-edge photonic chips, all produced in prototype volumes from the University of Southampton. Looking forward to the discussion.
Brilliant. Thanks, Andy. Alison.
Thanks, Rory. Hi, I'm Alison McLeod. I'm the Director of Photonics Scotland at Technology Scotland. So Technology Scotland is the representative body in Scotland for the enabling technology sector. We have about 130 members across 3 networks. We're kind of here to be a catalyst for growth and support the community through networking, collaboration, lobbying, thought leadership. And one of the reasons why this discussion is important to us, so Scotland is actually one of the oldest recognised national photonics clusters in the world. was founded back in 1994. And we do a lot of work in just trying to grow this community and make sure that we stay strong in our innovation strengths.
Brilliant. Thanks, Alison. And finally, Rachel.
Morning, everybody. My name is Rachel Doherty. I've recently been appointed the cluster facilitator for the Northern Ireland Photonics Innovation Cluster, or NIPIC. So really excited to be part of this conversation today. We've been officially going for about 2 to 3 months now, and have 12 SME members and broader around 30 to 40 stakeholders involved. So it's been a very fast-paced and great to see the level of interest and engagement in the cluster in Northern Ireland, and keen to hear from others who have obviously been involved in the space for that bit longer, and see how we can contribute and collaborate to the UK's overall photonics vision.
Amazing. Thanks, Rachel. So first questions first, we're going to launch straight into the panel discussion, and the first section is around what is a cluster and how do they work. So I wonder, Alison, if I can turn to you to ask, in the absence of maybe an official definition, how would you define a photonics cluster?
So it's a geographical concentration of industry, academia, and translational assets, so like your RTOs. And they all have a specific area of expertise. Obviously, in this format, we're talking about photonics. And clusters are important because they it shows that they increase productivity and innovation. They're good for economic development, and also that they can develop a skilled workforce for that industry.
Amazing. Thanks. That's really comprehensive. And I think that leads us on quite nicely, actually, to the next question I have for our speakers, which is, what sort of support do photonics clusters in the UK offer? Maybe, Lizzie, I can come to you to build on something Alison said. I mean, so around the talent pipeline, I'm thinking, and building local growth and talent, just how do photonics clusters help with that?
Yeah, so they can build employment and talent pipelines. It's the connectivity that you have in a cluster between industry and academia and local government can build and facilitate employee pipelines, education programs. So, for example, what we have at Smart Nano is a partnership with Queen's University in Belfast. And that provides us with a very skilled talent pipeline where we are able to co-author courses and also work together with the academia in order to build that employee pipeline too. But I mean, there's also an element where you have connectivity with SMEs too. So you're supporting smaller businesses to scale up. So for Smart Nano, we have there's an accelerator program, which is like this 12-week program where we can connect companies with industry and help them for prototyping and testing, and help them scale up essentially. So it builds local businesses and smaller businesses too, as well as sustaining the education element, and builds a kind of centre for excellence regionally.
Amazing. Okay, and just on that, Andy, I'd like to get your take on. So Lizzie mentioned local businesses and obviously Cornerstone. I mean, Ella and I are very thankful to have a tour of your facilities a few weeks ago, and I mean, it's very evident that there's not just a kind of academic angle to this. There's also definitely a commercial one. I mean, how do you see the role of photonics clusters in enabling the commercialization of these sorts of technologies?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think, and you're right, there isn't really a formal definition of cluster, but to Alison's point, they're generally considered to be a geographic location where you can change job without having to change school for your children. So you've kind of got that interconnectivity. I think specifically in Southampton, we've actually done some economic analysis, and actually, so these are brand new figures, have not been published yet. We have looked at the number of companies in the region and the geographic value, the gross value out of those companies, which is the conventional economic measure of impact, is about £250 million across the cluster in Southampton, employing about 3,200 people. So I think a lot of people are familiar with the South Wales cluster that's been very good at promoting its magnitude. And the Southampton cluster is actually around about the same size. So really sort of quite interesting piece of work there. What was really interesting when we did the work was that 22% of the companies are a direct spin out from the school at Southampton universities. So these are companies that have creating manufacturing lasers. So the world's supply of manufacturing lasers for the automotive industry and for iPhones, those lasers are all manufactured in Southampton. The defence industry is absolutely dependent on lasers for directed energy, taking out drones, etc. You won't find this information in the public domain for obvious reasons. Critical components to those are manufactured on the doorstep in Southampton. And those companies are a direct spin out from the university. So that kind of supporting industry, there is a direct linkage back into the academic base.
Amazing. Thanks, Andy. And just on that, I'd like Alison to get your take. So Andy mentioned that there's a lot of, I guess there's a lot of commercial opportunity. The external investors will jump on when you have such world-leading capabilities that Andy outlined. But on the flip side, you have kind of government funding these sorts of the universities or the companies that are within the cluster. So just how does it work in terms of, I guess, lobbying government funding bodies for support? Where are clusters in all of that?
So one of the things the clusters can bring to lobbying is that we are there to represent the whole cluster. So we come forward with a neutral, unified voice so that the big players aren't getting any more of a say than the small 1 or 2 person companies, for example. So we can go forward and take everybody's opinions to government and work for the whole cluster, really. So there's that benefit of being part of that neutral voice.
Yep, that makes sense. Brilliant. My final kind of question, I'm quite curious, Rachel. So your cluster is I guess quite early in its development still, and still being kind of firmed up. Be good to get your take on just what sorts of challenges you think you may be best placed to help with, or that Photonics clusters support with in general.
Yeah, I mean, it is, or yes, I think we're referred to as an emerging cluster, although we've found roots pretty quickly, I think. So for us at this stage of development, it's adding value to cluster members as soon as we can. And we have found that although some are in the advanced manufacturing engineering space, or they may be in, biotech space, having that, as Alison said, voice and sometimes an independent voice for amplifying awareness of the sector. A lot of the time it's what's photonics. Even companies that are loosely involved in or using photonics in an embedded or integrated way don't use the terminology. So it's making sure that the photonics sector itself is amplified in terms of awareness. I think having that independence of a separate body to liaise between academia, industry, SME, larger corporates, and start to make those connections and those relationships where there's links for collaborative R&D. There's, oh, I didn't know someone did that, and they're not that far up the road for supply chain strength. So yeah, we're finding our feet right now, but there's a lot that a cluster can do and that we are trying to do for member companies that are getting involved.
Amazing, yeah. And can you just briefly say just what the engagement looks like to, I guess, get views on board to shape how the cluster will support industry?
For us?
Yeah.
Suppose for us, we try various things. So we actually have received funding from Invest Northern Ireland for a cluster acceleration programme, which helps with us doing a feasibility study, as well as whether it be surveys. We love to get out and about and see each other, see what each other's doing, and have that relationship building piece. We've got frequent meetings getting involved, but a lot of outreach and engagement in order to try to baseline where the industry currently is and the needs as well and barriers to growth, so that we can then try and take some focused action to try and help resolve those. Everyone, I think was mentioned earlier, is so busy. A lot of our companies are at capacity. There are skill shortages. So having that extra capacity where the likes of myself is actually dedicated to trying to resolve some of these things separately to the day-to-day operations of the business.
Sure, that makes sense. Fantastic. So I'm conscious we've spoken a little bit about just what is a cluster and how do they work. I wonder if I can come to you first, Lizzie, to get your take on essentially how can industry best engage with the UK's photonics clusters. So are there fairly standard ways to engage, or does it, to a certain extent, I'm guessing, depend on the makeup of each cluster and the region within which they sit and the capabilities that they have access to?
Yeah, I think it's twofold. Firstly, it's having the intention of what you want to get out of a cluster, like what's your end goal here? How are you going to contribute? How are you going to complement activities within the cluster? Because it's a proactive partnership. It's something where you've got to engage and do something proactively. So you've got to be quite intentional early on with what you're hoping to both get out and put into a cluster. And then, yeah, definitely a regional dynamic is there. So, for us, it was quite easy in the sense that we had Queen's University Belfast on our doorstep, that is this centre of excellence and has this academic capability, and we have good government support in Northern Ireland and other sort of SMEs and local partners to bring them together. But so I do think that there's a regional component that has to be considered as well, and that you've got to look at what your strengths are locally and regionally around you, have that intention and bring them together. So I mean, for Smart Nano, it was industry-led, so Seagate led that cluster. So you could go about and try and make your own, but you do need to be both intentional and also work with what you've got. But yeah, I think in terms of if you want to engage with other clusters, see what your strengths are locally, see what you want to get out of it, and have those intentions early on. And that's the best way forward, I'd say.
Sure, that makes sense. And Alison, is that something you would that resonates with you as well?
Absolutely. I mean, I think the word proactive there is really the key one. The more the members are engaged with the cluster, the more they'll get out of it. So it's things like, sharing new information that perhaps they have, completing surveys that they're given, taking parts in advisory boards if they've got those opportunities, coming to us if they've got issues. So like, for examples, when policies and procedures change, maybe with, exports and things like that, coming to us if they're having a specific problem that maybe we can help with, attending meetings like special interest groups, workshops, networking events, just to know who else is actually in their cluster as well. So yes, that proactive angle, and really the more they put in, the more they'll get out of a cluster. I think also bearing in mind that there's a global cluster of clusters, if you like. So there is a whole global Photonics Alliance, and if you're engaging with your local cluster, you're effectively engaging with the whole world cluster-wise photonics.
Yep, that makes sense. And I guess linked to that, Andy, it'd be good to get your take on, I guess, not just other countries in this bigger picture, but other types of companies that may not call themselves a photonics company that can still engage with and benefit from photonics clusters. Just how would that work for industry?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think quite often photonics is used in many applications, and quite often the end user application doesn't necessarily associate themselves with being a photonics company. So, for example, an automotive company, welding car doors generally use fiber lasers to do the welding, and those fiber lasers are they were developed in Southampton, they're now manufactured in Southampton. So that company, the automotive company, wouldn't necessarily associated itself as being a photonics company. I mean, another example is Microsoft has just made a sizable investment into Southampton. So Southampton has invented the world's fastest optical fiber. This is absolutely critical for data centers to shift data around faster at lower energy. So you wouldn't naturally associate Microsoft with being a photonics company, and yet they've just made a massive, sizable investment in Southampton in order to anchor the technology in Southampton. So it's a real accolade that we've been able to attract that. The actual numbers are confidential, so I can't reveal the numbers, unfortunately. In fact, I don't know them, to be quite honest, but it's a very sizable investment. And you'll also see, kind of building on that, Microsoft investing in optical compute at Cambridge as well. So certainly the topic quite often appears slightly under the radar. So to your point, the applications are very numerous. I've got a little example of a photonic integrated circuit here, and one of the companies we're working with is doing blood analysis. Now, when you actually administer a medication to a person, quite often you don't know the exact dosage, and it can be a little bit hit and miss. And the idea behind this blood sensor is you can administer the dosage and immediately check maybe 30 seconds later to see what efficacy that is having by looking at the blood sample. So you can look at spectral components in the blood, that sort of thing, and you can check within sort of an hour of administering the drug whether you've actually administered the correct dose. So to your point there, Rory, they do have lots of applications, and they're not necessarily called photonics. They go into sort of the wider industrial base.
That's really interesting. And the hidden engine, is that what you've used before to refer to this?
Yes, I know. I can't claim ownership of that phrase. It's Dr. John Lincoln who runs the Photonics Leadership Group. It's his analysis that photonics industry, and we saw Ella sort of showing the figures, contribute something like 18.5 billion to the UK economy. It's actually larger than the pharmaceutical industry, and it is a hidden engine. It's the invisible machine that's driving so many end applications. We have another company working with us at Cornerstone that is developing precision navigation timing chips that do not rely on GPS. And you might be aware very recently that Ursula von der Leyen's flight was interrupted by Russian jamming over the Baltic states because it was reliant on GPS for its navigation. So you can imagine there's a real interest in developing a chip that doesn't need GPS, for the very simple reason that we need to know where we are under certain, when we can't rely on a GPS, for example, in that sort of situation.
Yeah, very, very interesting and topical. I'm Rachel, keen to get your view on, so Andy mentioned a number of sectors that are relevant to and that benefit from the UK's photonics clusters. Are you able to just outline what a few of those might be and in what sort of ways they tend to engage with photonics clusters?
Yeah, well, it can be very broad, and I think at least initially for NIPIC, we sort of welcome all in who want to get involved and get engaged. There's quite a few we've discovered who some of us didn't know have been going for quite a few years already, and just through connections have managed to bring in. So yeah, we have everything there from the biotech and health tech space into defence. That's quite broad already, even just for Northern Ireland being that slightly smaller region, but there's a lot of photonics going on in the space. I think in terms of engagement too, it's so important that it is proactive, because we don't have crystal balls. So as much as we want to engage members and work for them and do good things for them, we kind of shoot in the dark if we're not getting a sense of direction and steer from members. And I think for that too, it's so important to maybe have an internal person who is a bit of a champion and is a direct point of contact, someone who takes ownership and responsibility for that engagement piece, and can be someone that we can very quickly get in touch with. So yeah, there's additive manufacturing in our space. We've discovered some wearables companies recently that are doing some great work, that are reasonably young companies. So we're in the process, actually, I suppose, of me going out and digging a wee bit more and actually finding who more of those companies are that are doing great work, and probably have phenomenal international supply chains and making it great sales, but they've just kept under the radar themselves and not put their head above the parapet, and now we're trying to find them.
Interesting. Can I just ask, how would you go about trying to find these sorts of?
That is my secret. Those are all of my secrets, Rory. It's for me, and there's probably an irony in this, there's a bit of a traditional communication piece. So I come from a communications background, and it's not necessarily throwing up a LinkedIn ad, it's boots on the ground, and it's getting out and doing community and grassroots and meeting folks. And all of a sudden, Northern Ireland is often compared to a village, even though we've got a decent sized population. So it's people who know people who know people, and that's usually how we start bringing more connected members in.
Yeah, amazing. That makes a lot of sense. Brilliant. So we're just about, I think, to wrap up this section on how industry can best engage with the UK's photonics clusters. One thing I would like to ask is about models or types of industry engagement that have worked well so far. Lizzie, can I come to you to speak a little bit about Smart Nano and just what you've seen?
Cool. Yeah, as I say, so Smart Nano is Seagate-led cluster, so that's worked really well in terms of industry engagement. And I think also what works well is having a good, strong connection with your local education facility or university or regional colleges. So you have that as your employee and research base. And then also connecting with your other strengths, as Rachel said, it's exploring where your other strengths are, those companies that are also available on your doorstep. So for Smart Nano, we also have around 70 SMEs locally that we work with. And we have run various programs, like I mentioned, the accelerator program before, that helps smaller companies to scale up. And I think it's all around one vision. So the vision is to create Northern Ireland as a centre for excellence, as a regional regional strength, but also as a global, positioning globally in terms of the photonics tech space. That's the sort of vision there. So we can lead in one key technology, and that for us is photonics. So if we're all kind of collected behind that one goal, and then also finding funding streams is really key. So we've used UKRI funding, around 42 million worth of UKRI funding has backed, and that's Strength in Places funding, has backed the Smart Nano cluster. And yeah, it's just ensuring there's regular coordination too, that you're having conversations and to align on those goals regularly, having check-in. And yeah, just ensuring that those SMEs have that capability to scale up and that their voice is heard. It's not just being drowned out by the big players, by us as an example, but we're leading, we're not forcing in that area. Yeah, I think that's really what I would say is key, is having the ecosystem in place and being the driver, and not taking up all the space, and making sure you're all collected around that shared goal and shared idea.
Brilliant, thanks. Lots of really tangible stuff there. That's all great. I just want to quickly come to you, Alison, before we wrap up this section, to see if there's any other models or types of industry engagement that you say have worked particularly well from your experience.
Yeah, so for us, one of the things we do is we run special interest groups. So groups that are specifically focused on a certain topic. So there's 3 that we run regularly. They run at least once a quarter. There's a Photonics for Space group, which has been running for over 4 years now. We've got a quantum technologies one, since quantum's an area of particular expertise for Scotland, and we've got one that specifically looks at skills and sort of future skills needed and the leadership side of things. And it's that bringing together people around that focused topic. And we've actually, we do a lot of things like, what issues or challenges are people facing? We could be talking about new facilities that are opening, what infrastructure is available locally to people, for example, like the quantum hubs, what can they provide to the sector as a whole in Scotland. Skills, obviously, as I mentioned, we can talk about upcoming events, maybe funding calls, that side of things as well. And another focused activity that we've done is actually, Leslie mentioned the word vision, so we've actually published 2 vision papers in the last sort of 5 years in Technology Scotland. One was specifically on photonics in Scotland and tripling the size of that within a 10-year scale, and one's all about commercialising quantum technologies within Scotland and kind of cashing in, if you like, on the research and innovation expertise that we've had to date. So it's that real focused thing, I think, gets people really engaged.
Yeah, I can imagine. Okay, brilliant. So I'm going to kind of flip the focus a little and talk less about how clusters can support industry or government, but how industry and government can support clusters to maximise their impact. So, Andy, if I can come to you first,
Sure.
Are you able to share 1 or 2 of the biggest challenges that are faced by the UK's photonics clusters?
Yeah, I think it's kind of maybe sort of recognition and coordination of what's going on. But what it is worth reflecting. So Cornerstone is actually an innovation knowledge centre. So we partner with the University of Glasgow and STFC. And some of the access that we've been able to provide to date is we provide an open access PDK, process design kit, and it's a license-free. Process design kit. So that means that we're actually able to support something like 26 startups across the UK. And roughly the business model is quite interesting because it sort of spans a TRL level from 1 to about 7 and 8. That means something like 50% of our income comes from academics, and about 50% of our income comes from startups. So we're really in a good position to support those early stage companies. And I guess the question relates to, how do we then support those startups to scale up? So that is the real challenge. We're able to provide them with the prototyping capability, which those companies are able to use. Once they've got the prototypes, they can use that to raise early stage funding. I think some of the companies we're working with in the UK, seed funding have raised about 11 million so far. I think the real challenge is then sort of taking those early stage companies and getting them onto Series A and Series B funding and scaling them up. I think the other angle is, I was with the executive chair of Innovate UK last week, and we were he was reflecting on the fact that quite often UK companies think they should grow a market in the UK first and then take it to the world. And actually, the world has changed. We need to kind of look at growing globally from day one. And the companies that we're working with at the moment, as I say, they're very successful at the startup and attracting sort of seed funding. But there needs to be a kind of a mindset of going global and scaling very, very rapidly in order to take the market. So that's kind of, I think, where we need to sort of to move to, if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And is part of that promoting the strength of clusters internationally?
Absolutely, yeah. I think the UK has a particular strength in this area. We were on a panel last week actually with Lizzie at Cambridge Tech Week, and this came out very strongly about if you're going to place your investment into a particular area of semiconductors or photonics or whatever it happens to be, where would you put your money? And a couple of the things that came out in that discussion. One, this market space is moving at a very fast pace. So the specific analysis we've done in Southampton is an annual growth rate of 10% in the Southampton cluster. That's outperforming the average UK growth rate of 1.7%. So if you're going to put your money somewhere for economic growth, you would put it into an area which has got demonstrable growth potential. The other thing I think that came out in the panel discussion last week is UK has particular strengths in this area. It's highly research and innovation intensive, so it tends to be harder to commoditize it. Now, because of those research and innovation demands, that positions the UK to be in a particularly strong position. It means that if we're going to grow companies, we've got the startups coming through, but if we're going to scale them up, the UK is in a good position to do that. And I think lastly, Photonics, as we sort of touched on earlier, Photonics has so many different applications. It's absolutely a driving force for artificial intelligence. In fact, last week at the panel, Lord Culvia Ranger specifically asked about the ability of photonics to drive down the energy usage in artificial intelligence. And I strongly believe it's going to be able to do that specifically for things like AI at the edge and that sort of thing. So it has many, many applications. It's a rapidly growing industry. And it's something where the UK has particular strengths that we should be able to tap into.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that all makes sense. Lots of big challenges, but opportunities there too. I just want Alison to come quickly to you. I understand that you have some survey results that actually kind of quantify the question of the biggest challenges faced by the UK's photonics clusters. Are you able to share some of those with us?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things we do is we run an annual survey, and this is just to kind of do the health check of the Scottish sector. It's actually out at the moment for this year, so this will be our 6th one that we've done. And one of the things that this helps with is actually when we go to Scottish Government or some of the funding bodies to kind of go, look, here are the facts and figures in black and white. We can actually show how resilient the sector has been and how much it's growing. But basically every year it's the same three things come out top as one of the questions we ask every single year is, what's your organisation's biggest impediment to growth? And it's access to capital, access to skills and access to markets. Even though 97% of what's produced in Scotland leaves Scotland, people still think they've got an issue of accessing new markets, I guess.
Okay, very interesting. And that brings me nicely, I think, on to the next question I have, which is, I'd be really keen to get the take of our speakers on what's one quick win or one longer term policy change that government can action to better support clusters to maximise their impact. Maybe Lizzie, I'll come to you first. Do you have a particularly strong take on this?
Yeah, definitely a very strong take on this. So I would say there's a bit of an issue in terms of financial planning in the UK, in terms of we tend to look at the short term rather than the long term. So UKRI and Strength and Places funding are around 2 to 3 years in terms of the actual money that they'll give out and the project planning that takes place there. Whereas a lot of these photonics and cluster projects have roadmaps of between 5 and 7 years. So they tend to fall short, and that makes it really difficult for clusters and for businesses to actually plan and deliver on projects. So what we really need is long-term planning backed with finances, and that's to support our whole PIC ecosystem from the R&D stage, but all through the TRL technology readiness levels, and so that we can actually maximize on the potential of photonics. You know, as Andy was just talking about, there's such huge potential in the photonics area. You know, there's 50 billion is projected in GVA by 2035. There are so many end market capabilities that we can manufacture in the UK. It's a sovereign capability. There's so much potential, not just in hard drives and data storage, but, you know, as Andy's touched on, in the medtech space as well, and diagnostics, all across in defence, everywhere. And this is something where we have potential. And you look over to the Netherlands as an example. You know, they're very good at, they pick winners there. And what they did with their National Wealth Fund is they picked photonics. They backed it with 1.1 billion euros. It's huge. And I'm not saying that the UK has that capability or the money and banking to do that, but I think that's what we really need to see here is long-term planning. And with it's called Photon Delta in the Netherlands, that's over 7 years as well, 5 to 7 years, that they also have that funding stream. I think that's what we really need to see here is benchmark against some of those centres for excellence, and you know, see what we can do in order to maximise on that potential and deliver some actual benefit. But yeah, I would say long-term financial planning really needs to be top of the government agenda.
Absolutely. I'm gonna move us on in about 4 minutes just to quickly kind of wrap up before the Q&A. But very quickly, Andy, long-term strategy. I'm sure you're fully behind that. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I think to build on Lizzie's point, definitely, I think it's something that a lot of people have been asking for a long time, is Innovate UK, UKRI, to have the ability to plan long term. I think the other thing I would add into the discussion is when we speak to the end users, and we speak to a lot of end users, a lot of different markets, but in particular the defence primes, and what they're really interested in is some pilot line capability, some centre of excellence pilot line capability, where we can bring companies together, where we can integrate different technologies. Quite often I share this little chip. You know, that chip is fabricated in Southampton, but it doesn't do everything. We need to integrate an optical source onto it and a couple of other bits. So being able to do that, at the moment we can do them in prototyping volumes, but being able to do them in medium volumes would help the scale-up journey. It might link to a high-volume capability at Seagate, for argument's sake. It would certainly supply the domestic certain markets. You'd supply the medical market and the defence market. And just lastly, I was in the city. We've just published recommendations for the city to unlock capital investment. I can put a link of this in the chat if that's of interest, but it's definitely seen as being an exciting area where we can sort of crowd investment in.
Brilliant. Thanks, Andy. And that brings me nicely on to the question of incentives. And Alison, would you say that incentives for businesses to set up or stay in the UK is also something that's important here?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think in the UK we're very good at spinning out and starting up companies, but we're not necessarily quite so good in supporting them to scale up. And we could do with some incentives to bring other companies in as green companies, if you like, rather than just buying smaller companies here out, which some of the policymakers quite like. But you know, having those international companies coming to the UK and actually setting up here and having a base, those sort of incentives would be really good.
Yep, absolutely, and that's something anecdotally we hear in lots of different sectors and technologies at techUK. So definitely not restricted to photonics.
Yeah.
And then Rachel, finally, to end with you, is there anything that you think would be a good quick win or longer term policy change that government could action?
There's probably quite a few, and it's more about trying to prioritise the ones that we think maybe will move the needle a little bit quicker. I think for us, I mean, certainly there has been government support in Northern Ireland with the Smart Nano Consortium, and the legacy of that now coming out into the Northern Ireland Photonics Innovation Clusters. So I think we've seen in Canada, NGen have an ongoing and long-term cluster acceleration funded programme, and obviously we're not necessarily always wanting to look for handouts. We want to be able to self-fund to a point, and maybe match funding is a way of doing that. But I think having a dedicated ability to view clusters as a collective, you know, there's more power in the collective. There's an ability to communicate directly with the collective, get views, have that trusted voice. So where government tries to do outreach and engagement, maybe sometimes on a more one-to-one basis or regional basis, why not have a conduit that is engaged, up to date, working on behalf of? So, you know, support that. I think especially, you know, there's some challenges there for the SME community and the startup community, particularly around venture capital support or appropriate financial investment that might not be seeking an immediate return in 12 to 24 months with these deep tech and highly complex early stage. You know, there needs to be an understanding that these developments will take a certain amount of time in order to get, you know, commercialization ready. So I think, you know, increased investment efficiency and amplifying the sectoral needs in that way, but by having proper mechanisms for ongoing long-term and sustainable support, as opposed to, you know, a 12-month program, is probably a good way forward.
Yep, amazing. Okay, thanks, Rachel. In just a minute or two, I'm going to come to attendees to see if they have any questions for our speakers. So please do post questions in the chat, or I'll just ask you to come off mute and ask them if you'd rather do that instead. But right before we do, I just want to end the discussion by looking even further ahead and asking our speakers, and I'm not going to come to anyone in particular, but how do you think, if at all, the UK's photonics cluster landscape is set to change over the next 5 or 10 years? Is there anything that industry should be aware of? Obviously, we're talking about, you know, long development cycles and funding cycles potentially as well, as we're saying. Yeah, where are things heading? Feel free to jump in.
I mean, I can jump in a little bit on that. So I know that the Scottish Government does actually have a plan to kind of almost formalise the cluster landscape a little bit more. So they're actually looking at proper accreditation schemes for clusters. So cluster management organisations will have to uphold certain standards. And this obviously will be a good thing, hopefully, for all the areas of innovation in Scotland. And hopefully that'll bring all the clusters onto a slightly more level playing field, and then perhaps better communication between the different technology clusters as well. So in that point, it'll actually just bring more innovation really in Scotland again. So that would be the one thought on Scotland side of things.
Amazing, thanks, Alison. Andy?
I can add to that a little bit. I think one thing I've observed with clusters is if you're not careful, they start to heavily compete and duplicate. So I definitely think, the UK is not a massive country. What we ought to be doing is coordinating the activity so that we are looking for particular strengths. And I know Scotland's got particular strengths. I know Northern Ireland's got particular strengths. So it certainly needs a degree of coordination in order to project the UK as a single entity rather than as a fractional entity. Now, in that vein, the government has announced funding for a UK semiconductor centre. They've commissioned the Catapult, the Compound Semiconductor Applications Catapult, to set it up. They've been giving them a £19 million grant to get that set up. I understand things are moving quickly and it will be underway, and there will be a series of workshops. So if you want to come to the workshop in Southampton, it's on the 10th of December. I can't say what the dates are for the other areas, but I know
3rd of November for Scotland, apparently.
There you go. There you go. So, and I think the role of that semiconductor centre will, partly the role of that semiconductor centre will be to do the coordination piece.
Amazing. Okay, thanks, Andy. That makes a lot of sense. Feel free to put the link in the chat, and Alison to those events if you want to promote those. Lizzie.
Yeah, I think building on Andy's point, I'm optimistic that there will be more coordination between the clusters, just because there's more effort going into raising awareness, building sessions like this with techUK and industry organisation in general. I think there is more communication between the different clusters. So I think, and that centre I think is going to help and drive that forward. So I am optimistic that there will be more coordination. And if there's more coordination, then hopefully we can cooperate on our goals too. And there'll be a bit more progress in that area, less fragmented approach is what we've had to date. So that will, and in terms of driving our messages to government as well, that's going to be intrinsic within that vein, is if we can actually collaborate and work together and align on our messages, then I think we can hopefully have something which is more productive and tangible at the end of it, rather than the sort of fragmented approach that we've had to date, which makes it very difficult in order to drive any meaningful change.
Okay, interesting. Alison, do you want to come back on that point?
Sorry, it was just the collaboration thing that Lizzie had just mentioned then, and Andy. It was actually just to mention on Phil's point that he's put in the chat about the Torbay cluster and everything else. And they're a fantastic small cluster, and I try and visit them every time I'm in the south of England, because the stuff that they're doing down there is great, especially on the skills side. And I think this is where we can learn a lot between each other, is actually just what has one cluster done well, rather than us trying to reinvent the wheel. Talk to each other and actually kind of go, right, you've done really well here. How have you done that? And then, rather than us all not wasting time, but having to spend extra time doing it, we can learn from the other people in the UK that have done it well.
Thanks, Alison. Yep, completely agree with that. Phil, I don't know if you wanted to come back on that point. Maybe. Feel free to do so in the chat if you do. I see you've come off mute, but maybe technical problems. Brilliant. I can't hear you. Sorry, Phil. I don't know why. Try rejoining maybe. In the meantime, there's a question from Ellis in the chat. So thanks all. In your opinion, are there successful international examples of well-supported photonics clusters? So we've obviously mentioned the Netherlands. Yeah, Andy's eyes are lighting up. I'm guessing there are a few. Lizzie, do you want to go first?
Yeah, Photon Delta. I mean, I was over in the Netherlands back in August, and I went to go and visit Joost Janssen, who is the lead program manager of Photon Delta, just purely for my own interest. I wanted to visit their Eindhoven high-tech campus anyway. It's fantastic. If you ever get a chance to go over, I would recommend. And just to hear more about Photon Delta and their cluster and how it works. And I think it is successful because the government fully recognised that this was an area of strength, and it had huge market capability and what it could bring into the local economy as well. And obviously they have ASML, they have Eindhoven Technical University, they've got some fantastic organisations as well. I mean, TU Delft as well, a bit further afield, but excellent universities, SMEs and companies on the doorstep there, and also, European funding programs too. But it was fully backed by their National Wealth Fund. say about 1.1 billion euros within that, and over the course of 6 to 7 years too. So it's long-term funding, which really helps. And they're thinking about the whole ecosystem pick line. It's not just early stage R&D, it's the whole shebang. They're setting up prototyping and testing, and it's all quite neat as well, in the fact that it is mostly all in Eindhoven and all on that campus. So you could go and do R&D in one building and walk across and do testing somewhere else. So I think that has that benefit, and obviously the Netherlands has pretty good infrastructure in place for that too. But I think that's a real marker for success, I would say, if you want to look for an example of what we should be aiming for here. You put them on a pedestal, I would say.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. I want to visit now.
Yeah, would recommend.
It's sad I can't.
Sorry, Rory, can you hear me now?
We can. Yes.
Sorry about that. Thank you very much. If I could just agree with what Elizabeth said. When people come and visit us here down in Torbay High-Tech Cluster, I say kind of we have all the ingredients. We have South Devon College not too far away. We have our powerhouse universities, Plymouth and Exeter, literally within half an hour's drive. And then we have, the technical expertise here as well within the EPIC facility, Electronic Photonic and Innovation Centre. So we have all the ingredients here. We really profit from the local college, which is just 7 minutes walk away. They help us with engineering courses, photonics courses. One of the things we do find is we have some very good engineers that may come out of Plymouth or Exeter or other universities, and some of them kind of don't necessarily know a great deal about photonics. They're MCAD specialists, they're electronic circuit designers, they're finite element analysis guys, but they don't know what a photon is. And we use South Devon College to basically give them that additional kind of experience and learning. And it's actually delivered by people like myself and others here within EPIC. So it's a great way of working with academia, ensuring that the people that we have here can grow and fill any sort of gaps they may have in their own engineering skills. And you were talking about Photonic Delta earlier. Yeah, I get very jealous when I go over there, to be honest, because it is great, because you can tell the government are really behind them there. And again, you have the same. You have academic, you have the university there, you have lots of SMEs there, and there's also opportunities to grow. One of the good things with an EPIC, it's very popular. It's run by the council, and we have about 20 small SMEs here. And some of them are 2 or 3 people, some of them are 10, 20 people. And now Bay Photonics, who I work for, we're 35. And we're now finding it difficult. Where do we go now as we grow? We have our innovation centre, and we want to grow. And we're working very closely with the council to try and find somewhere where we can do more manufacturing, more high-tech manufacturing. The stuff we used to do a little bit here 20, 30 years ago with Nortel, but it left the UK. And we want to try and find ways for these SMEs to grow from 10 to 20 people to maybe 50, 100, 200 people. And not just people with PhDs and MSCs, but regular people, where you can give 20, 30, 40, 50 people or more, jobs to come and build stuff and learn as well. And that's great for, the UK PLC as well as Torbay here, which is known to be an area of, low economy, if that makes sense. So thank you very much. I'd just like to say that anyway.
Thanks, Phil. That's all super useful stuff. And particularly as we're going to take a lot of content from this webinar and put it into our Photonics report that will come at the end of this campaign. I'm just going to quickly, sorry, Andy, not to come to you, but we need to just quickly wrap up, but feel free to put your point in the chat if you wanted to raise something about international examples of best practice. Just to say that we've got an opportunity coming up to contribute to our Photonics Insights series. So please drop Ella an email there if you'd like to contribute by the 14th of October, but essentially a chance to feature your thought leadership piece on techUK's website, in our newsletters and on our social channels around how the UK can lead on photonics technologies around those kind of sub-themes below. Ella's just put the link in the chat to that Insights series. And I think final slide, just to say, please do reach out to us to get involved in the sprint campaign if you'd like to access the speaking or writing opportunities, or to talk to our members and stakeholders, or to shape how the campaign looks. We're really keen to support the sector in whichever way we can. So with that being said, thank you to everyone for joining. Please stay tuned for more activity in our Photonics Sprint campaign. And a big thank you to our fantastic panel of speakers for today's discussion.